He didn't even look up when he snapped his fingers. "Hey, you! Water! Now!" Row 14 went silent. The man in the aisle seat, a heavy gold watch, a loud shirt, and the kind of entitlement that announces itself before he speaks, waved the black flight attendant over as if calling a servant. The attendant, Jordan Hale, straightened his tie, smiled politely, and approached with the calm professionalism that only years of swallowing disrespect can build. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" The man's lip curled. "You can start by doing your actual job. Don't make me wait. Some of us paid real money for these seats." A couple across the aisle exchanged an awkward glance. A teenager pulled out her phone. Jordan could feel eyes on him, judging him, waiting to see if he'd react. He didn't. He simply nodded and reached for the water bottle. But the passenger wasn't done. "You know," he leaned back and spoke loudly enough for 3 rows to hear. "Back in my day, airlines hired professionals, not whatever diversity quota you are." The words hit like a slap. A woman gasped. A man muttered, "Bro, chill." Jordan stood frozen for half a second, because despite everything, insults still sting. But he didn't break. Didn't snap. Didn't give the passenger the satisfaction. He poured the water, handed it over, and responded with a steady voice. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" The racist smile widened. "Yeah, you can get me someone who actually knows what he's doing. Where's the real crew?" Jordan quietly exhaled. He dealt with arrogance. He dealt with impatience. But this was different. This man wanted a show. He wanted Jordan to lose control. He wanted a moment to twist into a complaint. But instead of rising to the bait, Jordan stepped back. "Sir, if you have concerns, I can call the senior crew member." "Oh, please do," the man scoffed. "Let's see how long you last in this uniform." Jordan walked down the aisle, the entire cabin feeling the tension like static in the air. 3 rows back, the first officer, sitting in a passenger seat before takeoff, had watched the whole exchange. He slowly stood up. Passengers whispered, "Is something happening? Is he in trouble? Why is the pilot here?" The rude man folded his arms, satisfied. Finally, someone was going to put Jordan back in his place. Jordan turned, expecting to defend himself yet again. But the first officer stepped past him, past the passengers, and stopped right in front of the disrespectful man. His posture was crisp, voice steady, authority radiating off him. "Sir," he said, "before this aircraft departs, proper respect toward crew is mandatory. That includes every member of our team." The man smirked. "And who exactly are you to lecture me?" The first officer didn't answer, because someone else walked up behind him. Someone whose presence shifted the entire atmosphere. The captain. Gray hair, 4 stripes, calm but unmistakable command. He looked directly at Jordan first. "You okay, son?" Jordan nodded, quietly grateful someone finally saw him. Then the captain turned to the passenger, and his voice dropped into that cold, decisive tone every pilot uses when there is 0 room for debate. "Sir, you will speak to my crew with respect, especially him." The rude man blinked. "Your crew? He's—" The captain cut him off. "That man," he said, pointing at Jordan, "is not just a flight attendant." The cabin stilled. A heartbeat of silence. Then the captain delivered the line that flipped the entire plane upside down. "He is a decorated Air Force veteran. He trained me. And on this aircraft, you will address him as Sir." Every jaw in row 14 dropped. Phones came out. The arrogant passenger shrank back into his seat, suddenly tiny, suddenly aware he had insulted someone far greater than he imagined. And Jordan? For the first time in a long time, he saw people looking at him not with doubt, but with respect. Jordan Hale had handled turbulence, emergency landings, and panicked passengers, but nothing tested his patience like entitlement at 35,000 feet. Row 14 was barely settling in when the man in the aisle seat snapped his fingers. Not called, not requested. Snapped. His fingers. Hey, you. Water. Now. Jordan stopped mid-aisle. He had heard disrespect before, but this tone? Loud, sharp, dripping superiority? The whole row felt it. A woman paused, pulling off her jacket. A teenager's hand froze over her phone screen. Even the baby 2 rows down stopped fussing. Jordan approached with his practiced calm. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" The man didn't look at him. He didn't even acknowledge him as a human being. His eyes stayed glued to his tablet. "You can start," he said, waving a lazy hand, "by doing your actual job. Don't make me wait. Some of us paid real money for this seat." Jordan nodded. He had swallowed worse. Years of customer service teaches you how to stand straight even when someone is trying to bend you. He reached for the water, staying professional. Then the man lifted his voice, intentionally loud, so everyone around could hear. "You know, back when airlines hired qualified people, not whatever diversity experiment you are." Someone gasped. A man muttered, "Bro, relax." Another whispered, "Did he really just say that?" Jordan felt something crack inside. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion. Exhaustion from knowing he'd have to endure it with a smile. He poured the water, handed it over gently. "Anything else I can help you with, sir?" "Oh, definitely," the man replied. "You can get me someone who actually knows what he's doing. Where's the real crew? Or did they hire you to fill a quota?" Jordan froze for half a second. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew he couldn't say any of the things he wanted to. Jeez. And him, passengers shifted uncomfortably. A mother shielded her child's ears. A college student recorded discreetly. This wasn't a simple complaint anymore. This was humiliation performed like theater. Jordan inhaled. Deep, steady, silent. "Sir," he said, "if you have a concern, I can call the senior crew member." The man smirked, satisfied. "Oh, please do. Let's see how long you last in that uniform." Jordan didn't answer. He simply turned, straightening his shoulders, walking slowly down the aisle. People weren't just watching now. They were waiting. Because none of them, not even Jordan, knew what was about to happen next. That the insult he took silently would soon become the reason the captain himself would walk down that aisle and flip the entire power dynamic upside down. Jordan felt every pair of eyes on his back as he walked away from row 14. He wasn't shaken, not visibly, but inside there was a pressure he knew too well. A pressure built from years of staying calm while someone else tried to make you feel small. He reached the galley, rested one hand on the counter, and exhaled once. Just once. Because that's all he ever allowed himself. He didn't know that 30 feet behind him, someone else had stood up. A figure he had passed earlier without noticing, because he looked like any other tired traveler waiting for departure. Except he wasn't. He was the first officer, the second in command of the aircraft, seated among passengers temporarily while the crew completed pre-flight checks. And he had seen everything. The first officer, Ethan Cole, was a quiet man, controlled, reserved. But as he watched the entitled passenger sneer, mock, and degrade a flight attendant simply doing his job, something old stirred inside him, a memory from training days, a lesson his instructors drilled into him. You protect your crew, no exceptions. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, almost ceremonially. The soft click cut through the murmurs around him. Passengers closest to him looked up. "Is something wrong?" a woman whisper asked. But he didn't answer. He just stood, tall, composed, his uniform pressed with precision, his eyes fixed on row 14 like a surgeon preparing to operate. Meanwhile, the arrogant man leaned back in his seat, satisfied with himself. He took a sip of the water he'd demanded, completely unaware that the ground beneath him, the social ground he thought he ruled, was about to collapse. A teenage boy nudged his friend. "Yo, is that the pilot?" "I think so." Their whispers spread through 3 rows like wind. Ethan walked down the aisle with the quiet authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice. His steps were measured, unfazed, and every person he passed straightened instinctively. At row 14, he stopped. Not beside Jordan, not behind the rude man, directly in front of him. The passenger frowned. Can I help you?" His tone was still smug, still arrogant, still the voice of someone who believed consequences were for other people. Ethan didn't react. His voice came out level, calm, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice and treat my crew with respect." The man blinked. "Your crew? Who the hell are you?" Whispers surged again. Ethan didn't answer his question. Instead, he glanced at the passengers around them, acknowledging their discomfort. "This cabin must remain safe and respectful before we depart," he said. "That includes how you address our staff." The man let out a laugh, loud, dismissive, ugly. "Oh, come on. Are you serious? He's just a flight attendant, and a terrible one at that. Look at him. Can he even do his job properly? I'm the customer here." Something flickered in Ethan's expression. Not anger, but a kind of disappointment deeper than that. "You're out of line," he said firmly. The man scoffed, waving him off like an annoying salesman. "Save the lecture. You're not even the pilot. Where's the person actually in charge?" Passengers stiffened at that. Ethan took a small breath, because the irony was almost painful. Then another voice entered the scene, a voice that froze the arrogant man where he sat. "Right here." All heads turned. Walking down the aisle with the calm, imposing energy of a seasoned leader was the captain. 4 stripes, silver hair, eyes sharp enough to cut metal. He wasn't rushing, he didn't have to. His authority walked with him. Phones lifted discreetly. A kid whispered, "Oh boy." Someone muttered, "He's done." The captain reached Ethan, placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, an acknowledgement, a silent thank you, and then stepped forward. The passenger stiffened, suddenly unsure. The captain didn't look at him first. He looked at Jordan. "You okay, son?" Jordan nodded, stunned that someone had stepped in this quickly, and this strongly. Then the captain turned, and the air changed. Cold, controlled, absolutely unforgiving. "Sir," the captain said, "you will not disrespect my crew, especially not him." The man attempted a weak smile. "With respect, Captain, he—" But he didn't finish, because the captain wasn't interested in excuses. He was preparing to say something that would crack the entire cabin open. Something no one, not even Jordan, expected. Something that would flip the humiliation straight back onto the man who started it. Something that would reveal who Jordan Hale really was before he ever wore that uniform. For a moment, the entire aircraft felt suspended, not in the air but in silence. A silence so tense you could almost hear every heartbeat within 3 rows. The arrogant passenger shifted, his confidence slipping as he sensed a shift he didn't understand yet. The captain stood squarely in the aisle, hands clasped calmly behind his back, and studied the man with the same silent assessment pilots use before making a life-or-death decision. Sir, he said quietly, I'm going to make something very clear to you before this flight goes anywhere. The passenger opened his mouth ready with another arrogant retort, but for the first time, no words came. The captain's presence pressed him into silence. The older man nodded once, almost to himself. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward Jordan, who stood several feet behind, still stunned by how quickly chaos had spiraled into protection. That man you insulted, the captain began, isn't just a flight attendant. Passengers leaned forward. A woman literally held her breath. A businessman put his phone down mid-text. The entitled man frowned. What, is he your nephew or something? The captain didn't even blink. No, he said, voice low but razor sharp. He is a decorated United States Air Force veteran. Gasps rippled like a wave through the cabin. The rude man blinked. Wait. What? The captain stepped closer. Not intimidating, just undeniable. He has logged over 2,000 hours in critical air operations. He served during missions where a single mistake meant the difference between life and death. The captain's voice grew quieter, more precise, and he performed flawlessly. Jordan swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. He deliberately left that life behind. He rarely talked about his service, especially not at work. Most passengers never knew his past, and he preferred it that way. But today, the captain was not letting that past be minimized. The passenger let out a weak laugh. Come on, he's making that up. Eyes narrowed across the row, but not at Jordan. At him. Because more and more, he looked like a man sinking exactly into the humiliation he tried to inflict. The captain tilted his head. You think I would lie about military service? The passenger shrank half an inch, but the captain wasn't finished. In fact, he said, I recognize Jordan because... He paused, letting the weight land. Because he trained me. The cabin exploded with whispers. Trained the captain? No way. He used to be a commander. The arrogant man's face lost color. He suddenly sat up straighter, like the oxygen had thinned around him. Jordan felt his chest tighten, a mix of embarrassment, pride, and disbelief. When he moved into commercial aviation, he'd intentionally avoided attention. He didn't want to be saluted. He didn't want to be called commander anymore. He just wanted a job where skies were peaceful, not hostile. But today, his quiet identity had been dragged into the spotlight, for the right reason. The captain took a half-step closer to the man, his tone shifting into cold precision. When you insulted him, you insulted a man who has done more for aviation safety than most people will ever understand. He pointed slightly at Jordan, not aggressively, but with the same respect an officer gives another in uniform. When he wore his uniform, he safeguarded lives in situations far more dangerous than anything you will experience on this flight. The man swallowed hard. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by an uneasy, trembling confusion. And on this aircraft, the captain said, leaning in just enough for the entire row to hear, you will address him as Sir. A stunned silence stretched, and then something no one expected happened. The rude man's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He deflated, like a balloon losing air. Passengers watched him shrink, ego punctured so severely he couldn't even form an objection. Ethan, the first officer, stood behind the captain with a faint, approving nod, but stayed quiet. The captain was leading this moment, and Ethan knew nothing he could add would match its impact. Jordan finally stepped forward, not angry, not smug, simply standing in the truth of who he was. The entire plane could feel it. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically. It left the temperature of the cabin changed. The man who tried to humiliate Jordan had just been reduced to silence by a single sentence. You will address him as sir. And this was only the beginning. Because the captain wasn't done. There was still one more decision to make, one that could determine whether the man stayed on the aircraft at all. The man in row 14 sat frozen, not like someone who'd been scolded, but like someone whose entire worldview had been yanked out from under him. For the first time since he boarded, his voice, the one he used as a weapon, had abandoned him. But the captain wasn't finished. Oh no. Not even close. He clasped his hands behind his back again and gave the man a long, assessing look, the kind parents give their children right before delivering a life-changing lecture. Sir, the captain said calmly, what you displayed a moment ago was not frustration. It was verbal harassment toward a member of my crew. The man swallowed hard. Look, Captain, I didn't mean... The captain raised a hand. Not to silence him, to control the narrative. You raised your voice. You used racially charged language. You belittled a professional who was performing his duties correctly. Around them, passengers nodded subtly. They had witnessed every second. They had felt the tension in their throats, the discomfort twisting in their stomachs. And on top of that, the captain continued, you attempted to provoke him in front of the entire cabin. The man exhaled shakily. I wasn't trying to... But again, the captain cut in. Not with rudeness, but with authority crafted from decades of command. Let me be very clear. This aircraft does not depart with hostile behavior on board. Safety and dignity come before schedules, before customer status, before anything else. A woman whispered to her husband, He's done. A teenage girl whispered to her friend, I'm recording all of this. The man looked around, realizing that dozens of eyes were no longer curious. They were judging, and he was failing the test. The captain leaned forward, hands clasped behind him, voice lowering into a tone everyone in uniform recognized, the tone used when a final decision was forming. So, I need to ask you a question, the captain said. The entire row held its breath. Are you willing to remain on this flight and comply with the crew's directives respectfully? The words hovered mid-air like a legal contract, not a suggestion, not a request, a condition. The man cleared his throat. I just want to get to Denver. That's all. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. Answer the question, the captain said, voice steady. Can you treat my crew with respect? The man finally nodded. Yes. Yes, of course. But the captain didn't accept that first, panicked answer. He held the man's gaze another few seconds, measuring sincerity like a surgeon measuring oxygen. I need verbal acknowledgement, the captain said, that you will follow instructions without disrespect, mockery, or escalation. The man's face flushed red, humiliation burning hotter than anger. Yes, I will. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. Passengers exchanged shocked looks. They didn't expect an apology. Definitely not from him. But the captain still wasn't done. He stepped aside, revealing Jordan again. Then your apology, the captain said quietly, goes to him. The man froze. No smirk. No arrogance. No fake confidence. Just fear. Social, moral, and suddenly very real. For the first time, he actually looked at Jordan. Sir? He blinked, forcing the word out as if swallowing glass. I apologize. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. Jordan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't savor the moment. He nodded once, calm, professional, dignified. Thank you, Jordan said simply. Because that was who he was, even when others weren't. The captain gave Jordan a subtle nod, pride flickering in his eyes. Then he returned his attention to the rude passenger. "Understand this," the captain said, tone gentler but still firm. "Your words have consequences up here. You don't get to tear people down and hide behind a ticket stub." The man lowered his head. "So," the captain concluded, "you may stay on this aircraft, if you behave. If not, security will remove you before departure." The message was unmistakably clear. The hierarchy had shifted. Respect had been restored. And every person in the cabin had just witnessed something rare. Justice delivered at 35,000 feet, not by anger, not by shouting, but by truth and leadership. And Jordan? He had no idea that this confrontation was only the beginning, because the captain still had one more revelation, one that would change how every passenger on that plane viewed him forever. The moment settled over the cabin like a blanket, heavy, humbling, impossible to ignore. The arrogant passenger stayed quiet now, shrinking into the fabric of his seat, while tension slowly dissipated from the aisle. But the captain wasn't ready to walk away yet. There was something deeper, something unseen, something he felt compelled to clarify. Not for the rude man, but for everyone who had watched Jordan be disrespected so publicly. He turned toward the cabin, his voice steady but softened. "I want you all to understand something about this crew member," he said, nodding toward Jordan. "Something important." Jordan stiffened. He wasn't used to being talked about like this, certainly not in front of a plane full of strangers. His instinct was to fade into the background, not become the center of a spotlight he never asked for. But the captain continued. "Many of you don't know this," he said, "but before Jordan joined commercial aviation, he served in the United States Air Force." Gasps returned, smaller this time, but filled with awe rather than shock. A young man in a hoodie whispers, "He was in the Air Force?" His father nodded solemnly. "That explains the posture." The captain folded his arms thoughtfully. "He wasn't just a serviceman," he said. "He became one of the youngest airmen to lead tactical response teams during critical international operations." Jordan felt heat rise to his face, not embarrassment, but the weight of memories. Dust storms, helicopter rotors, radios crackling with impossible decisions, nights he wondered if he'd even make it home. The captain took a step closer to him. He earned commendations for bravery, leadership, and precision, the kind of commendations that, well, most pilots only hope to understand. The rude passenger stared, jaw clenched, humiliated by the magnitude of the man he'd belittled. But the captain kept going. "When I was a young pilot," he said, "I ran into some turbulence during my training. Not turbulence in the air, turbulence in here." He tapped his temple gently. "I doubted myself. I struggled. And the man who helped me become the pilot I am today." He gestured to Jordan. Was him. The cabin fell quiet in a way that was almost reverent. Jordan blinked, struggling to keep his composure. He hadn't expected this story to surface. Not now, not ever. It had been years since he'd worn the uniform, but hearing the captain speak it aloud suddenly made all the buried memories rise like fog. He cleared his throat softly. "Captain, you don't need to—" But the captain lifted a hand. "I do," he said quietly. "Because this flight is staffed by people who have lived through storms the rest of us will never see. And when one of my crew is attacked, I will not let his dignity be questioned." Passengers nodded slowly, moved. Some had tears gathering. Others looked at Jordan with new eyes, not as the man delivering drinks or helping them with seatbelts, but as someone who had protected lives, long before he ever served peanuts in a cabin. The arrogant man in row 14 finally spoke, small, shaky. I didn't know. Jordan turned to him, voice soft but firm. You didn't need to know, he said. It's not about rank. It's not about titles. It's about treating people like they matter. Because they do, no matter who they are or what they've done before this. The passenger swallowed, stunned. Jordan continued. You don't have to respect someone's past to respect their presence. That line landed heavier than anything the captain had said. The captain nodded, proud. Exactly, he said. We all serve different roles up here. But every role matters. Every uniform matters. Every person matters. The plane seemed to breathe again, tension replaced with unity. A few passengers began clapping softly, unsure if it was appropriate. But then someone in row 16 joined. Then row 12. And soon, applause swelled through the entire cabin, raw and sincere. Jordan stood there, stunned. He hadn't been applauded in years. Not since he left the Air Force. Not since he traded medals for name tags. Not since he chose peace over glory. And here, in this narrow metal tube surrounded by strangers, respect found him again. Unexpected, uninvited, but deeply earned. And yet, the flight wasn't in the air. Seats weren't upright. The cabin wasn't dimmed. There was still one final call the captain needed to make, and it would determine whether this flight lifted off at all. The applause slowly faded, replaced by something heavier, something that made the very air in the cabin feel different. Respect. Real, earned, unshakable respect. Jordan stood still, absorbing it, almost struggling to reconcile the moment with the humiliation that had sparked it. But as the last claps settled, a different kind of tension rose. Because one question still hung in the air. Would the flight even take off now? The captain stepped lightly forward, reclaiming command of the moment. His eyes moved from Jordan to Ethan, the first officer, and finally back to the man in row 14. The rude passenger sat rigidly, hands clasped, identity deflated like a balloon pressed too hard. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind something almost unfamiliar on his face. Fear. Not of physical danger, but of consequence. The captain inhaled deeply, scanning the cabin, not dramatically, but with the practiced calm of a man who had handled storms both literal and human. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I appreciate your patience during this delay. Before we proceed, I need to address our next steps. Passengers leaned in. The captain continued, As you all witnessed, there was an incident of verbal harassment toward a crew member. That is unacceptable on any flight, and especially this one. Jordan felt his pulse rise again. Even after all the validation, the situation wasn't over. Policy had rules. Aviation didn't play with safety, emotional or physical. The captain looked down at the rude passenger, not with anger, but with decision. Sir, he said, I asked you earlier if you were willing to remain on this aircraft and comply with all crew directives respectfully. You gave your word. The man nodded quickly, too quickly. Yes, Captain, absolutely, I won't cause any more trouble. The captain didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to Ethan. First Officer Cole, he said, in your judgment, does this passenger pose a continued threat to cabin safety or morale? The entire row stiffened. The rude man's eyes widened. Ethan stepped forward calmly. Captain, he said, voice clear enough to carry to 3 rows. His behavior was aggressive, targeted, and intentionally provocative. However, he glanced at Jordan, measuring his emotional state, evaluating his control, acknowledging his strength. I believe he understands the severity of his actions now." The passenger exhaled shakily, relieved. But Ethan wasn't done. "That said," he continued, "the final call belongs to you." The captain nodded slowly, weighing responsibility, safety protocols, and the atmosphere of the cabin itself. He turned to Jordan. "Son, how do you feel? Are you able to continue serving on this flight safely and comfortably?" Jordan blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever asked him that before. Not in the Air Force, not in commercial aviation, not anywhere. He could feel every passenger watching him, not waiting for him to perform, but waiting for his truth. Jordan steadied his breath. "I'm good, Captain," he said quietly. "I can do my job." The captain held his gaze a moment longer, confirming it wasn't obligation speaking, but resilience. Finally, he turned back to the rude passenger. "Sir," he said, voice firm but not unkind, "here is what will happen." The man swallowed audibly. "You will remain on this aircraft under the condition that you treat every member of this crew, and every passenger, with the respect expected on a commercial flight." "Yes. Yes, absolutely," the man stammered. "You will not raise your voice, provoke, insult, or escalate any further interaction." "I won't, I swear." "And if you violate even a single directive," the captain said, leaning in slightly, "security will meet us on the tarmac and escort you off this aircraft immediately." The man nodded rapidly, like someone agreeing to the terms of their own survival. "Yes, Captain. I understand." The captain straightened, authority settling around him like armor. "Good." He turned to the cabin, raising his voice just enough. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will resume final checks shortly." A soft wave of relief swept through the passengers. People shifted. Seatbelts clicked. Murmured conversations restarted. But even as normalcy returned, the rude man wasn't done learning his lesson, son. Because when the captain stepped aside, Jordan walked past him. Not fast, not slow, just steady. And for the first time since boarding, the man looked up at him with genuine respect, maybe even fear, and moved his legs aside so Jordan had space to pass. The same man who once snapped his fingers at him, the same man who mocked him loudly, the same man who thought he could break him with words. Jordan didn't pause, didn't stare him down, didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, a gesture of professionalism the man had never deserved but needed to witness. And then Jordan continued down the aisle, heart steady, unaware that the flight's emotional climax was still coming. Because a passenger, one who had silently watched the entire confrontation, was about to stand up and speak. And what she said next would bring the cabin to tears. As Jordan walked down the aisle, reclaiming the rhythm of his duties, the cabin slowly thawed back into its pre-flight shuffle. Bags shifting, seatbelts clicking, murmured conversations rippling like distant waves. But one person wasn't settling back in. A woman in row 11, window seat, maybe mid-50s, with silver-streaked braids and warm brown eyes, stood slowly, not abruptly, not for attention. She rose with the reverence of someone approaching a memorial. Jordan stopped when he noticed her. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" he asked gently. Her voice came soft, trembling, not with fear, but with emotion so raw it made nearby passengers straighten instinctively. "Yes," she said. "Everything is okay now, but I need to say something." The captain paused mid-aisle. Ethan looked over. Passengers turned one by one, sensing a moment forming. The woman clasped her hands in front of her, steadying herself. "I watched what happened," she said, looking directly at Jordan. All of it. And I want you to know, you handled yourself with a dignity most people only pray they possess. Jordan opened his mouth to respond, but she lifted a hand. Let me finish, son. Something in the way she said son made his chest tighten, not in a painful way, in a way that felt familiar, grounding, like stepping back into a home you hadn't seen in years. She took a soft breath. My husband served in the Air Force, she continued. 30 years. He trained young pilots, too. Men and women who went on to fly missions, people in this world will never hear about. She swallowed, eyes glistening. He used to say, true strength isn't in the uniform, it's in how you act when nobody salutes you. The cabin fell pin-drop silent. Even the rude passenger, previously a black hole of ego, wasn't breathing too loudly. The woman's voice cracked as she looked at Jordan with something deeper than admiration. Recognition. And today, son, you showed that kind of strength. Jordan felt something shift inside him. Memories of long days on the tarmac, long nights in barracks, long missions where fear and duty danced side by side. He had left that life behind. But the discipline, the humility, the code, they never left him. He nodded slightly, unable to trust his voice. But the woman wasn't finished. She reached slowly into her bag. For a moment, passengers leaned in, not afraid, just curious. Then she pulled out something small, a pin, a simple one. Bronze, clean, worn with years of pride. My husband passed 2 years ago, she said softly. He always carried 2 things, a picture of our daughter and this pin. He gave it to me before he died and said, her voice cracked again, give this to someone you see living the values I taught. Jordan's breath caught. The captain bowed his head slightly, as if honoring an unseen comrade. Ethan swallowed hard. Several passengers wiped their eyes. The woman stepped into the aisle holding the pin. Today, she whispered, I saw those values in you. Jordan froze. He'd been thanked before, comesi, handed down, even decorated. But this felt different. This felt earned in a way medals never captured. Ma'am, he began, voice rough. I can't take that. It belonged to your husband. She smiled through tears. And he would want you to have it. She gently pressed the pin into his hand. It was warm. It was heavy. It was sacred. Jordan blinked fast, fighting the sting in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, she replied. Just keep being who you are. A soft wave of emotion swept through the cabin, reaching even the corners where passengers had been quiet observers the whole time. And then, something even more unexpected happened. A young man in row 10 placed his hand on his heart. Then someone in row 12 did the same. Then row 15. Within seconds, half the cabin was sitting silently, hands on their hearts, eyes on Jordan, honoring him the way people honor heroes they never knew they needed. Jordan stood still, that pin resting in his palm like a promise, like a reminder, like a truth about himself he had buried too long. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers, respect didn't just return. It rose, and it lifted him. Higher than rank, higher than medals, higher than the uniforms he once wore. But the flight still needed to take off. And the final emotional twist, the one that would tie everything together, was seconds away. Because the captain was about to make one more announcement, one that would leave the cabin in absolute awe. The cabin was hushed, reverent. Not with fear, not with tension, but with something far more powerful. Honor. Jordan stood still, the bronze pin resting between his fingers, heavier than anything he had carried in years. The woman from row 11 had returned to her seat, wiping tears discreetly as if she hadn't just reshaped the entire atmosphere of the aircraft. Passengers stared at Jordan with a level of respect he wasn't used to receiving in or out of uniform. Some nodded at him. Some smiled gently. Some simply gazed, as if seeing not just a flight attendant, but the man behind the name tag, the man behind the silence he wore like armor. Jordan took a slow breath. The captain stepped forward, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You all right, son?" he asked quietly. Jordan nodded. "Yes, sir. Just taking it in." The captain smiled gently, a rare expression on a face usually hardened by responsibility. Then he turned toward the cabin, straightening his posture, and everyone knew something important was coming. He cleared his throat, his voice steady and warm as it carried through the rows. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before we depart, I want to say a few words, not as your captain, but as a man who has served alongside some extraordinary individuals." Passengers leaned in. The rude man in row 14 sank lower. Even the babies seemed to quiet down. The captain continued, "When you fly with us, you see uniforms, blue shirts, stripes, badges, but what you don't see is the life each crew member lived before they put these uniforms on." Jordan shifted slightly, unsure where this was heading. "You don't see the sacrifices," the captain said. "The years of training, the missions, the hardships they carried alone. You don't see the nights they stayed awake so others could sleep peacefully." His eyes found Jordan again. "And in Jordan's case, you don't see the battles he fought long before he ever stepped into a commercial cabin." A soft murmur rippled through the plane. The captain gestured toward Jordan, not dramatically, but with genuine pride. "This man is not just a part of our crew. He is part of our aviation lineage. The men and women who dedicated their lives to making the skies safer for everyone." Jordan felt his throat tighten. The captain looked back at the passengers. "And today you all witnessed something powerful. Not just a correction of disrespect, but a reminder of the dignity every human being deserves." The rude passenger dropped his gaze fully now, his cheeks burning with shame. The captain continued, "We are honored to have Jordan on our team, and I am honored to have served under his guidance long before I ever earned these 4 stripes." The cabin hummed with awe, people whispering things like, "Wow, he trained the captain. What a story. Unbelievable." But the captain lifted a hand for quiet. "One more thing," he said, voice softening. "In this industry, in life, we meet many people, but every now and then we meet someone who reminds us what true service looks like." He looked directly at Jordan. "And today, that person is you." Jordan blinked rapidly, fighting the urge to wipe his eyes. The captain then added something nobody expected. "Before we leave the gate, I would like to ask everyone, if you're comfortable, to join me in acknowledging Jordan's service, past and present." The plane didn't hesitate. One by one, like a wave rolling across the rows, hands lifted, hands pressed to hearts, heads bowed. Row 9, row 10, row 12, row 18, even the flight attendants near the galley joined in, their own eyes shining. Jordan felt the world tilt under him, not physically, but emotionally. He had been honored before, but this felt different. This wasn't ceremony. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't military formality. This was human gratitude, and it was overwhelming. Jordan swallowed hard. Thank you, he whispered, barely audible. But somehow, everyone heard it. And then, finally, the captain lifted the intercom radio, pressing the button. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice firm and composed once again, "prepare for departure." The flight was ready. The tension was gone. The respect was restored. But just when peace returned, a voice, hesitant, emotional, Cal, led out from the back of the plane. "Jordan, sir, can I say something?" Jordan turned, and what came next was the final emotional twist no one expected. The cabin, moments away from settling into quiet pre-takeoff routine, froze again. Jordan turned. So did the captain. So did Ethan. So did nearly every passenger. A young man, maybe 22, slim, wearing headphones around his neck and a worn military-style backpack at his feet, stood up from row 27. His eyes were red, his fingers trembling slightly as he gripped the top of the seat in front of him. "Jordan, sir," he swallowed. I need to say something." Jordan blinked, caught off guard. "Yes," he said gently. "Go ahead." The young man took a shaky breath. "When the captain said you served in the Air Force and that you trained pilots," his voice cracked, "I realized something." The cabin leaned in. Ethan narrowed his eyes, curious. The captain lifted an eyebrow. Even the rude man in row 14 shifted, sensing this wasn't just another compliment. This was personal. The young man continued, his voice trembling but gaining strength. "My older brother, he served too. He was a pilot." Jordan's chest tightened. He knew that tone. He knew the weight of sentences that start like that. "He used to talk about someone," the young man said. "A mentor. A senior airman who trained him. Someone he said was the calmest, bravest man he'd ever met." Jordan's breath caught. The young man wiped his eyes. "He talked about this man all the time. Said he saved his life during a training incident. Told him he had ice water in his veins, and that he wouldn't have become a pilot without him." The cabin was silent. Completely silent. Jordan felt the bronze pin in his hand grow heavier, hotter, almost vibrating with the past. The young man reached into his backpack. Passengers held their breath. He pulled out a small photograph, edges worn, corners soft from being carried too long. He held it up slightly, not enough for everyone to see, but enough for Jordan. "This is my brother," he said softly. "Lieutenant Marcus Reed." Jordan's knees nearly buckled, because that name, that face, wasn't just familiar, it was unforgettable. Marcus Reed was the young pilot Jordan had once dragged out of a failing aircraft during a malfunction drill. Marcus was the one who nearly quit aviation after that incident. Marcus was the one Jordan had coached through fear, through doubt, through trauma, until he rose again stronger than ever. Jordan had wondered, sometimes quietly in the dark, what became of Marcus. He never expected the answer to be standing in front of him on a random commercial flight. The young man's voice softened to a whisper. "He always said he owed everything to the man who trained him." He swallowed hard. Before he passed last year, he told me, "If you ever meet him someday, tell him I never forgot." A collective gasp filled the cabin, quiet, but full of grief and awe. Jordan's world blurred for a moment, not with sorrow alone, but with something deeper. A collision of past and present. Memories he thought he'd buried rose like waves, Marcus laughing during drills, Marcus panicking during his first emergency simulation, Marcus hugging him after his first solo flight, Marcus saying, "I won't let you down, sir." Jordan felt tears warm his lashes. The young man stepped into the aisle, clutching the photo. "I didn't know I'd meet you today," he whispered, "but the moment I heard your name, I knew." He held the photo out to Jordan. "He wanted you to have this." Jordan took it, hands steady, heart anything but. The cabin inhaled as one. The captain lowered his head respectfully. Ethan blinked, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. Even the rude passenger in row 14 looked away, ashamed in a way that went far beyond embarrassment. Jordan stared at the photograph, Marcus smiling in uniform, sunlight hiding his face just right, a face frozen in time, yet vividly alive in memory. Jordan whispered almost to himself. He made it. He became everything he wanted to be. The young man nodded, tears finally spilling. "Because of you." Jordan closed his eyes, not to hide tears, but to honor a fallen brother in the only way he knew how. When he opened them again, the entire cabin was on their feet. Not clapping, not cheering. Standing, as one, in silent tribute. Jordan held the photo to his chest. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder again, firmer this time, and the young man whispered the words that broke the cabin open. "My brother called you a hero. Today, now I understand why." The entire cabin stood in silence, not commanded, not cued, but moved by something deeper than protocol. A kind of reverence you don't plan. You just feel. Jordan stood in the aisle holding Marcus Reed's photo against his chest, as if steadying both the past and the present in the palm of one trembling hand. The bronze pin the woman had given him earlier glinted softly between his fingers, two symbols of two different lives converging into one extraordinary moment. The young man from row 27 wiped his cheeks, embarrassed but unashamed. "Thank you," he whispered. "For him. For everything." Jordan stepped closer, placing a hand gently on the young man's shoulder. "He made the choice," Jordan said quietly. "He fought. He rose. I only guided him." The young man shook his head. "He always said you saved him." He sniffed. "And now, I feel like he's here too." Jordan swallowed, unable to answer. Because he felt it too, felt Marcus's spirit settling in the cabin like sunlight after a storm. The captain approached, standing tall yet softened by the weight of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "you have just witnessed something few people ever see, the legacy of service stretching far beyond a uniform." Passengers nodded, their eyes red-rimmed, their hands still pressed to their hearts. The captain glanced at Jordan. "I'd like to ask everyone to take their seats so we can prepare for departure. But before that," he paused. "Jordan, would you do us the honor of making the pre-flight announcement today?" Gasps, smiles, whispers. Jordan froze. Flight attendants rarely took the intercom for takeoff, especially not in place of the captain. But the captain wasn't making a symbolic gesture. He was giving Jordan the respect he deserved. Ethan stepped forward, smiling. "Sir," he said, "you earned this moment." Jordan inhaled deeply, then nodded. The captain handed him the intercom. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something far more powerful: purpose. Jordan lifted the radio to his lips. For a heartbeat, the cabin held its breath. Then, in a steady, calm voice shaped by years of discipline, Jordan spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jordan Hale. It is an honor to serve you today." People smiled. Some cried again. Phones were lifted discreetly. "Thank you for your patience," Jordan continued. "Thank you for your respect, and thank you for reminding me why service in every form, matters. He paused, glancing down at Marcus's photo. To those who serve, to those who have served, and to those who support them, we see you. We honor you. A wave of emotion rolled through the cabin. Jordan finished softly. Please fasten your seatbelts, stow your belongings, and prepare for departure. And wherever you're headed today, may you reach it safely. He handed the intercom back. The captain placed a hand over his heart, not as a superior, but as a brother in aviation. Beautiful, he whispered. Jordan nodded, unable to speak. The young man returned to his seat, holding the armrest like it was the anchor to a memory. The woman in row 11 dabbed her eyes, smiling with pride. Even the rude man in row 14 stared at the floor, utterly humbled, changed in ways he might never articulate. As Jordan walked down the aisle one last time before takeoff, passengers stopped him softly. Thank you. You deserve this. You're a hero. My father served too. He'd be proud of you. Strangers, united by what they witnessed. When Jordan returned to the front, the captain gave him a single nod. Ethan signaled the cabin secure. Engines hummed, lights dimmed, flaps adjusted. The plane, at last, was ready to rise. But before the story closes, Jordan looked at Marcus's photo once more and whispered, I hope I made you proud today. And somewhere between memory and sky, maybe the answer whispered back. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment respect to honor every unsung hero who serves quietly, in uniform or out of it. Your support helps bring more true, powerful stories to life.